She said, I cheated because I needed a stronger man. I should have felt something, anger, disbelief, even sadness. But all I could do was stare. The person standing in front of me, the one I had built a life with, suddenly felt like a stranger. Arms crossed, eyes downcast. Not in shame, but in boredom. Like she was waiting for this moment to pass. It landed like a statement of fact, not an apology, not even a justification. Just a simple, emotionless truth she expected me to accept. For a second, I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because of how ridiculous it sounded. Stronger? What did that even mean? Physically? Mentally? Was it about money? None of it added up, but the thing that hit me the hardest wasn't the confession itself. It was the way she said it, like she was stating an obvious fact, like I should have seen this coming a long time ago. I let her words hang there, hoping, maybe even daring her to take them back, to show the slightest hint of regret, but she didn't. She just stood there, waiting as if she were observing me, studying my reaction like it was some kind of experiment. And then her family spoke. Well, can you blame her? I turned my head, slow and disbelieving. Her mother was the one who said it, arms crossed just like her daughter, wearing the same cold expression, like they had planned this moment, rehearsed it even. You've always been passive, her father added, his voice carrying that same tone of dismissal. She needed more from you. And then her sister, lounging on the couch, legs crossed, barely even looking up, just shrugged. Honestly, we all saw it coming. That was when it clicked. The walls weren't closing in on me, but something inside shifted. And it wasn't pain, it was clarity. Like a blade cutting through steel, the realization settled in. They weren't defending her. They were blaming me. I glanced back at my wife, or whatever she was now. She still hadn't said a word, letting them speak for her like she always did. I had poured years into this marriage, given everything I had, worked myself to exhaustion to build something for us. And this was what I got in return? Not just betrayal, but complete disregard. Like my presence in her life had been a convenience, something tolerated until it wasn't needed anymore. I exhaled, slow and steady. There was no use arguing. I saw it clearly now. Their minds were already made up. The truth? This had never really been my marriage. It had always been theirs. A family affair where I was just an extra piece, the provider, the outsider who had outlived his usefulness. I looked at her one last time, searching for something, anything that might make me feel like I was losing something valuable. But I felt nothing. That's when it happened. I smiled. And then, before I even realized it, I laughed. It wasn't something I forced, not a reaction I had planned. It just burst out of me, pure and unfiltered, like my body couldn't hold in the sheer absurdity of it all. And that's when the room erupted. Are you seriously laughing right now? Her sister's voice cut through the air, thick with outrage. Across from her, their mother leaned forward, her face twisting in something close to disgust. This is exactly what we mean. You never take anything seriously. No wonder she needed someone else. I exhaled slowly, letting my gaze sweep across the room, meeting each of their eyes one by one. This wasn't just about them siding with her. No, they genuinely believed I was the villain in this story. Pathetic, her father muttered, shaking his head like I was some kind of embarrassment. Your wife just told you she had to go elsewhere for what she needed. And this is how you react? Her sister scoffed. Honestly, just leave already. You don't deserve her? For a brief moment, I considered asking them, what exactly did I do to deserve this? But I didn't bother. It wouldn't have mattered. In their eyes, I had already lost, and they were going to make damn sure I never forgot it. And her, my wife, still silent, still standing there, letting them do all the talking for her, just like she always had. It was almost funny how predictable it was. I let out a long breath, rubbing my temple. So let me get this straight. She cheats on me, lies to me, throws away everything we built, and somehow I'm the problem? Her mother's eyes narrowed. You pushed her to this, her father said with a firm nod, as if it were a universal truth. A real man doesn't let his wife feel neglected. Neglected, the word was so ridiculous I almost laughed again. I had worked myself to exhaustion to make sure we had a good life. I had been there for her, through every pointless fight with her sister, every breakdown over things that didn't even matter. I had held her when she felt insecure, reassured her when she doubted herself. I had been loyal, I had been present. But apparently, none of that counted. I looked at her one last time, waiting, hoping for her to say something, to take even the smallest amount of responsibility. But she just stood there, biting her lip, arms still crossed. Nothing. And that was all I needed to see. I had spent years trying to be the man she needed. But the truth was, she had never wanted me. I had been convenient. And now I was disposable. Slipping a hand into my pocket, I pulled out my keys, rolling them between my fingers. Their voices rose, overlapping each other, all of them desperate to get the last word, to make sure that when I walked out that door, I carried the weight of failure with me. I wasn't listening anymore. My decision was already made. The sound of my keys clicking together was barely audible over the chaos in the room. But it didn't matter. They were still talking, still arguing, still trying to hammer it into my head that all of this was somehow my fault. I tuned them out. Instead, I looked at her one last time. She hadn't moved much, arms still crossed, face unreadable, like she was waiting for me to snap, to plead, to ask why. But she wasn't going to get that from me. She didn't deserve it. A smirk tugged at my lips as I shook my head. You know what? I'm done. The words hit like a grenade. The room went dead silent. For the first time since this disaster of a conversation began, no one had anything to say. Then her mother scoffed. Oh, please, don't be dramatic. Dramatic? I arched an eyebrow, slipping my keys into my palm. You all wanted me to take responsibility, right? Fine. I'll take responsibility for the only thing that actually matters. And with that, I turned toward the door. That's when she finally reacted. She stepped forward, her expression shifting. Shock? Anger? Maybe both. Wait, what? I didn't stop. Her father's voice cut through the moment. Are you seriously walking out right now? That's the kind of man you are. Running away? I let out a breathy chuckle, fingers wrapping around the door handle. You've spent all night telling me I'm not a man, so why do you care what I do now? I pulled the door open, and that's when the real panic set in. Wait! Her voice was sharper this time. There was something desperate in it. You're just going to leave? Just like that? I glanced back over my shoulder. Yeah, just like that. Her sister scoffed, half laughing like she thought this was some kind of bluff. You're really going to throw everything away over one mistake? I raised an eyebrow. One mistake? My wife's jaw clenched. I told you why it happened. Yeah, you needed a stronger man. I heard you the first time. I met her eyes and let the words sink in before tilting my head slightly. Let him handle it then. For the first time, I saw it. Real fear. I didn't wait for a response. I stepped out into the night and pulled the door shut behind me. And just like that, I was free. Or at least I thought I was. My phone started buzzing before I even made it to my car. One call, then another, then another. By the time I slid into the driver's seat, my screen was lighting up like a damn Christmas tree. 50 missed calls. I stared at the screen for a moment. Then I chuckled to myself. Now they cared. The second my engine roared to life, my phone erupted with vibrations, skidding slightly on the passenger seat from the sheer force of the calls coming in. One after another, her name, her mother's, her sister's, even her father's. They were tag-teaming, desperate to drag me back into the mess I had just walked away from. I didn't pick up. I didn't even hesitate as I pulled out of the driveway. And for the first time in years, I felt something I almost didn't recognize. Relief. Not just the absence of noise, but real, unshakable peace. The kind that settles deep in your bones when you finally realize you don't owe anyone an explanation. But they weren't ready to let me have that. I turned onto the main road and the flood of messages began. First one, then another, then an entire barrage. Her, are you seriously ignoring me? You can't just walk away like this. Her mother, come back and talk like an adult. Her father, pathetic. Her sister, wow, you're really running away? That's hilarious. I exhaled through my nose, smirking. They still thought they had control, that their words could shake me, that their judgment mattered. Then another message popped up. I'm sorry, okay? Just answer me. Ah, there it was, the shift, the predictable pivot from rage to guilt tripping, from scorn to pleading. It was a pattern, one I knew well, one she had perfected over the years. But I wasn't falling for it anymore. I kept driving. The calls didn't stop. The messages kept rolling in. My phone buzzed so violently that it nearly slid off the seat. Another text, her. Please, just talk to me. I don't want to lose you like this. We can fix this. Fix what exactly? The fact that she threw away everything for a guy she thought was stronger, that her entire family had stood there, united, blaming me for her choices. She hadn't given a damn about fixing anything when she made that decision. At a red light, I glanced at the screen, debating for half a second. Not because I wanted to answer, hell no, but because I was curious. Just how far would she take it? What desperate excuse would she spin? Then before I could even entertain the thought, another message lit up the screen. You can't just leave me like this. I need you. Now she needed me, not when she made her choice, not when she stood there arms folded, watching her family rip me apart, not when she let me walk out that door without saying a word. No, now it mattered. Now that reality was hitting her like a freight train. I exhaled, feeling something settle deep inside me. Something solid, something final. My fingers hovered over my phone for just a second before I tapped exactly where I needed to. Blocked. Then I tossed the phone into the glove compartment, shut it, and kept driving, never once looking back. That should have been the end of it. But people like her, they don't just let go. They don't just accept consequences. For the first few days, it was blissfully quiet. No calls, no texts, nothing. Almost peaceful. But I knew better than to trust it. And sure enough, I was right. It started with the concerned friends. People I hadn't spoken to in months suddenly crawling out of the woodwork, acting like they gave a damn. Their messages all followed the same script. Hey man, I heard what happened. You should really talk to her. She's having a tough time. Maybe just hear her out. You know, relationships go through rough patches. Maybe you should consider forgiving her. Forgive her. Like this was some minor lapse in judgment. Like she hadn't made a deliberate choice, spitting in the face of everything I'd ever given her. A choice she stood by, right up until she realized her so-called stronger man wasn't so strong after all. Because that was the truth, wasn't it? She thought she could trade up, thought she could replace me with someone more thrilling, more dominant, whatever illusion she had built in her head. But reality doesn't bend for fantasy. The guy she gambled on, he wasn't interested in playing my role. He wasn't going to cover her bills. He wasn't going to shoulder her burdens. He wasn't going to clean up her messes. She wasn't his partner. She was a distraction, a fleeting bit of entertainment before he moved on to something else. And now that I was gone, now that the safety net I had built for her had vanished, she was finally feeling the weight of her choices. I got confirmation of that when I ran into an old coworker of hers at a coffee shop. A guy I barely knew, but who apparently knew all about my situation. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice like he was letting me in on some big secret. Man, she's been a wreck, complaining about money, saying she doesn't know how she's gonna keep up now that you're gone. I took a sip of my coffee, barely even reacting. Sounds like a personal problem. Yeah, well, he shrugged. She really thought he'd step up. You know, the other guy. But I guess that didn't happen. Of course it didn't. What was she expecting? That a man who had no problem sleeping with another guy's wife would suddenly turn into the picture-perfect husband? That the same guy who fed into her complaints about me would be thrilled when those complaints became his problem? No, she rolled the dice and lost. And now reality was catching up fast. Her family wasn't going to bankroll her lifestyle. They weren't going to fund the comfort she had taken for granted. And that so-called stronger man, he got what he wanted and moved on. As for me, I was long gone. Funny thing is, sometimes disappearing makes a louder statement than any argument ever could. After those first days of silence and anger, word started to spread. And once people realized I wasn't coming back, the fallout hit her fast. From a distance, I watched as the life I had left behind began to unravel, thread by thread. She was struggling, that much was clear. The fantasy had crumbled, leaving behind nothing but consequences. The man she had convinced herself was an upgrade turned out to be nothing more than a distraction. He had never planned to take on real responsibilities, never intended to be anything more than a temporary escape. And now, in his absence, there was no safety net, no reassurance that life would go on just as before. Her family, the same people who had lined up to justify her betrayal, started pulling away. They weren't so eager to stand by her now that the weight of her choices had become undeniable. Without me, bills started piling up. The day-to-day routine became heavier, and while I had no interest in the details of her downfall, hearing about it only reinforced one thing. I had made the right choice. There was nothing left to fix, nothing worth salvaging. I had walked away from a situation that was beyond repair, reclaiming control over my own life instead of drowning in the wreckage she had created. Some people probably expected a big dramatic ending, a screaming match, a tearful reconciliation, but I had no interest in any of it. My old life with her had been a slow drain of compromises and quiet sacrifices. I had given more than I ever got back. And now, as she faced the reality of standing on her own, the truth was clear. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about getting even. It was just the natural consequence of her choices. A relationship only works when both people are building something together. The moment one person decides to tear it down, the foundation collapses. I had walked away before the rubble became mine to clean up. Occasionally, old friends would ask if I had any regrets, if I ever thought about going back. Their questions, no matter how well-intended, fell on deaf ears. That part of my life was long gone, and I had no desire to revisit it. I would just shake my head and tell them the truth. Some doors aren't meant to be left cracked open. Healing doesn't come from hoping for a reconciliation that will never happen. It comes from closing the door for good and walking away without looking back. There was no dramatic comeback, no last-minute realization, no late-night phone call where she bared her soul and made me question everything. Life simply moved on, and I had found my own rhythm, one that wasn't weighed down by constant judgment, misplaced expectations, or the exhausting task of proving my worth to someone who had never truly valued it. Meanwhile, she remained stuck in the mess she had created. The absence of my stability, my effort, my presence, it all became a painful reminder of what she had taken for granted. While she tried to piece her life back together, the damage was already done. Some mistakes leave scars that never fully fade. In the end, my leaving wasn't a loss. It wasn't surrender. It was a statement, one final undeniable truth. I had removed myself from something toxic, something unsustainable. Some stories don't get a second chance. This one is over. I have selected 2 more videos that I think you will enjoy. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot.